With that, we are going to jump into the message. And we're going to be kicking off a new collection of talks that I am titling The Root of the Restless. Today will specifically be part 1, The Illusion of Elsewhere. Once again, Root of the Restless, part 1, The Illusion of Elsewhere. You know, something I feel like I run into often is just a restlessness among humanity as a whole. Meaning, and where a lot of this actually stems from is if you research Hebrews 11 and 12, it's the only time in Scripture that you see something transposed or interchanged with the promised land that is mentioned in the Old Testament. And what I mean by that is, if you know anything about the Old Testament, you know that God kind of brings these people out of slavery and bondage, his chosen people, and says, I'm going to give you a promised land. And that promised land is a many-day journey that turns into 40 years. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on it. But essentially, in the New Testament, Paul really kind of breaks this down in an interesting way. Is essentially what we see, though, is it talks about the promised land as kind of this product of faith, but actually what it says is it says in that specific text that they were not able to enter the promised land, and they weren't able to enter into his rest because of their disobedience. So he mentions promised land, then pulls it out, and he says, because they were unfaithful, they could not enter my rest. Because they were disobedient, they would not enter my rest. And he's referencing the promised land, but he's taking out promised land and introducing this new thought that the promised land was going to be the ability to rest with God and in God. Now, I say that because if I were to ask you, what does your promised land look like? Many of us, we could probably even sit here right now and be like, all right, it's a 7-car garage, 5,000 square foot, huge pool, helicopter pad, right? You can kind of fill in this idea of a promised land in your mind. But what's interesting, essentially, is that the promised land to Paul, the ability to rest in God, the ability to rest, really, period. I say that because we're not the most restful society. You can actually research, they said when technology came out that they were worried in the 80s in the onset of the internet era that it would cut the work week down by 50%. There was predictions that everything would be optimized. Now many of us are like, well, AI is going to do that. And then all of a sudden we're all going to be working 100 hours in 40 years because that's how it always works. We think we get more efficient, but we get more bogged down. Anyway, I say that because ultimately I think the goal of all of us, or not, the goal of all of us is the ability to rest, the ability to breathe, the ability to not have racing, anxious thoughts, the ability to be at peace, to be content, to feel whole. And so I say that because I feel like a lot of the times what I run into, and I would say it's been an extreme acceleration, is this restlessness in people. Now, obviously, our church is pretty young. We haven't been around that long. We also impact a lot of younger people. So I think it's compounded by this FOMO environment, or I should say just straight up, it's social media environment, where you assess the best of everybody else's life through the lens of the worst parts of you. Because when you're looking at social media and you're looking at somebody else's vacation, what are you thinking? Gosh, I wish I had a vacation. When you're looking at somebody else's outfit that you can't afford, you're thinking, I need to work harder so I can buy that outfit. When you're looking at somebody else's hairline, no, I'm not making any jokes, right? I say all this to say, what is it? There's not this ability to be restful and content in your own soul because you don't have what they have and you want what they have. And then there's this endless cycle of comparison, coveting, anxiety, restlessness, and it continues. Because even if I were to ask you what your promised land is, most likely it's an illusion of what people tell you it should be: the house, the kids, the yard, the pool, the amount in your bank account. But ultimately, the promised land was rest. And today, what I want to talk about for these next few weeks, I have really 6 weeks built out, but it might be 7, it might be 5. We'll kind of see what happens. But I want to talk about the roots of our restlessness. And specifically today, it's this illusion of elsewhere. Now, I say this because I feel like this is what I run into often, is that we have an idea of once I get to this level, I get this thing, I get around these people, then ultimately, guess what? I'm at rest, I'm at peace. That there will be no restlessness anymore. If I get this amount in my bank account, if I get to this status, if I can get this external affirmation or validation, if I can get this blue check for $20 a month next to my name on Instagram. All I'm trying to say is this, is that truly, right, the illusion of elsewhere is that. It's the mirage of humanity. Seeing in a distance what you think will be, ultimately to find out that it's not there. And I feel like as you age, there's seasons in which you've walked through that. I feel like I've been through 4 iterations of that, which is if I get this, this, and this, and then I've got it, and then all of a sudden it moved into this other thing, and then I got that, and then all of a sudden, and then you realize you're like, oh dang, I don't know if I'll ever be at rest unless I find my rest in God. Even St. Augustine said that mankind will always be searching for rest until they find rest in God. Now, I remember I've always been a planner. I've always been driven. I've always been motivated. This is what I need to do, and this is what I'm going to get when I get there. And I'll never forget one of the first times I didn't make it into the NFL as an 18-year-old. Sadly, the genetics on my side dealt me a hand of cards where I was 5'10", 145 pounds with a lot of heart, which doesn't get you on the Green Bay Packers. But I remember when I graduated high school, I also was not a bookworm, and I decided to take a gap year and did missions. And I remember we had 4 options for a mission trip, and one of those options I felt very strongly I was supposed to go on, and that option was India. And I ended up spending about 3 months in India. And I'll never forget, there was a lot of these options, and it was funny because all throughout my time kind of getting ready to go, you had a month and a half to decide where you wanted to go. And I knew day one I was going to India. And so literally we came in, I'm very excited, we get ready to go, and we make our decisions, and I'm like, no, I'm going to India, I'm decided. And I'll never forget, we fly into India, and the very first place we're staying is a place called Calcutta. If you've never heard of that, this is the place that Mother Teresa is made famous as helping street people in. Now, Calcutta is a unique city of India. Now, we fly into Calcutta, get in super late at night. I'll never forget. If you've never been to India, it's insane because you jump in these little rickshaw, bike, motorcycle things with all your bags, and you're like, how is there not car accidents every 1.3 seconds? Because it's like a swarm of mosquitoes driving in different directions, and you're just surviving, holding on, making sure you're not going to perish. And I remember we get to our first place, and we needed to crash in one place randomly for one night, and then essentially the second night was where we were going to be. And so I remember we stay our first day there, and it is insane, all that's going on. And we get to our first spot, and I'll never forget, we go to our first spot, and I realize I left my sheets at the previous spot. And in India, the places you stay, you pretty much just got a cot. And so I had brought 3 months worth of my bedding that I no longer had. And so I remember I get there, and while I was getting there, I started feeling sick. And so I remember I get there, and believe it or not, this is really before smartphones, and so there's no real internet or anything. So I remember we go to this place, and the first night we're there, I'm sleeping on a mattress with no sheets on it. I'm deathly ill. I have no cell phone or anything to distract me. And I remember getting up and walking outside of my door and having to put shoes on because there was empty syringes all outside my door on the way to the bathroom. And I remember thinking to myself, what I thought I was going to get in India is not what I'm getting right now. I'm sick. I'm in a room with 12 dudes. I'm stepping over syringes on the way to the bathroom. I've got nothing to distract me. And McDonald's is not the same in India if you didn't know. All food is very different in India. I'll never forget when I was there. I like spicy food, and I would go out to eat, and they're like, you like spice? Little spice? Oh yeah, little spice. By the end of the trip, they'd be like, do you like spice? I say no spice. But not just no spice, I want minus spice. Minus. Not just zero, negative spice. I like spicy food. That's how hot it was there. What am I trying to get at? The illusion of what I thought I was getting was different than what I got. I think many of us can sit in this room and think about the life maybe you thought you would have. The relationships you thought would always be there. The place or season in which you were most happy that maybe is no longer you're acutely aware of. And there's this illusion of if I could get somewhere else, do something else, be around somebody else, possess something that would make me feel that promised land once again. And ultimately, what am I really trying to say to you today? That your promised land is God. Now, I say that because we sit here and we're like, okay, well, that's easy for you to say. You hold the microphone. But once again, it's not just a promised land as a physical place, but the wholeness, the contentment, the peace, and the nearness of the Father's house is the invitation of all of us together to explore and to find for ourselves. So today what I want to do is I want to jump into a not talked about very often, super overlooked story called the prodigal son. Some people are like, oh, sick, I would go to the church. I've heard 9 million sermons on prodigal son. Well, don't worry. Hopefully this one's a little different. It's okay, right? We're going to jump into a story on the prodigal son. It's in Luke 15, 11 through 24. That's where we're going to spend our time today. And I hope I can kind of break it down with some new meaning and in a new way for all of us to understand. Let's jump in. It says this. And he said, this is Jesus, a man had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of the estate that falls to me. So he divided his wealth between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered everything together and went on a journey into a distant country. And there he squandered his estate with loose living. Now, when he had spent everything, a severe famine occurred in that country, and he began to be impoverished. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of the country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would have gladly filled his stomach with the pods that the swine were eating, and no one was giving anything to him. But when he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired men have more than enough bread, but I am dying with hunger? I will get up, go to my father, and will say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me one of your hired men. That is slave, is what it actually says in the other translations. So he got up, came to his father, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him, felt compassion, ran and embraced and kissed him. And the son said to his father, Father, I've sinned against heaven and in your sight. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his slaves, quickly bring out the best robe, put it on him, put a ring on his hand, sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf, kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and has come to life. He was lost and he has been found. Now, let's kind of unpack this. I'm going to try to kind of do this. I could spend a decent amount of time on the prodigal son, but kind of some quick hitters straight out of the gate. We know in Deuteronomy 21 verses 17 that this wasn't an equal split of the inheritance, meaning as the younger son, he would only receive 1/3 of what his father had. Now, that 1/3 though was not liquid, meaning today if somebody says their net worth is this, we automatically think in dollars and cents. Most of the time people are not holding that liquid. They have to sell everything. But back then is a completely different era. Because monetary money was not necessarily this widespread thing, only in certain areas. In kind of rural provinces, it was land and livestock that was your equitable assets. Now, essentially, this process that takes place behind the scenes of this son getting the 1/3 would have looked very, it would have been out of the ordinary. And what I mean by that is it would have been like jarring to the secular society of that day. And what I mean by that is essentially for a father, first off, to agree to give a younger son the inheritance, and then also to liquidate 1/3 of his entire net worth. That just didn't happen. Why? Because people didn't just have garage sales with their stuff. When they had a 1/3 they were trying to get away. This would have been a process that would have taken weeks or even months in order for him to get to his son. Now, this is a fascinating take because essentially what we see is that the son shows up and impulsively says, hey, Father, I want my share of the estate. And then the father meticulously sells off a long process and gives and honors his son's request. It's a very interesting look because this is very uncommon. But what we also have to understand is to make this request as a Jewish son is essentially to say, Father, I'm not going to wait for you to die. I'm going to treat you as if you're already dead. Now, I'm going to share a little bit on this later, but if you know the 10 Commandments, honor your father and mother. My mom still quotes that. I'm 35 this year. Thank you, Mom. Yes, I do honor you, but you are still a helicopter. Anyway, that's not honoring. It's all repent. Altar, 12:30. But I say this because ultimately what's going on is that this son has showed up and said, I want my share of the inheritance. I don't want to wait till you die. I want to receive my portion even as you are alive, and I'm essentially going to treat you as if you are dead. Now, jumping into this third aspect, you have to understand the Greek word for squandered, right? Because it said he squandered his worth on loose living. Squandering is the Greek word diascorpizio, and it means to scatter in all directions, almost to throw into the wind. This is something as being wasted recklessly through careless and undisciplined living. So it's essentially this picture of somebody holding something and in the wind just throwing it out. I would say that that's an interesting picture of squandered, and the Greek text does a very good job of projecting what that picture is. But here's the other thing that is oftentimes missed, and it's a huge hint because, believe it or not, I think this is kind of a key to the story. So when it says that he squandered his loose living, what has he done? He's got nothing else to live on, and what has he led to? Pigs. Now, you have to understand the Judaistic society, you weren't really allowed to not just eat pigs, but touch pigs. You can actually research in Leviticus 11, 7 through 8, that essentially you were actually pronounced unclean if you dealt at all with pigs. Not only did this guy tend pigs, he ate the pig's food. Literally, this guy has not only squandered his affluence and his family, but now he's literally doing the opposite of what his religion demands of him to live. He has chosen to enter into pigs. Now, the process of the prodigal son story, and I think this is missed within the context of just skimming it, is a son that completely loses his identity. And what I mean by that is it's one thing to lose your family, it's one thing to lose your money, it's another thing to lose your religion and lose what you think is your relationship and access to God. Because in Judaistic custom, to be somebody who lived in an unclean way, you were not allowed into the temple and you were not allowed into temple possession. Meaning that this prodigal son did not just lose his family and squander his wealth. He now does not believe he even has a place in God's house. So he's lost what he thinks is his earthly father, but he's also lost his standing with his heavenly father. See, what is the completion of this though? His earthly father taking his son back, forgiving him, and reestablishing him in his home. We're going to spend some time going through this in a second, but I want to say this. Where did it all start with? Where did it all go wrong? With a son that didn't trust or believe in the goodness of life alongside the father. Impatient, he pursues his own happiness, only to discover the true happiness is in the house he wanted nothing to do with, alongside the person he had thought he was free from the shackles of, that his father's house and his father's way of life was actually the safest place, even though he thought it was the place he wanted to get the farthest away from as fast as possible. See, we want a life in which I have God's blessing or the blessing of my father. And I would even say this, the inheritance of being a son and daughter, but none of the responsibility of the father's house, ownership, and business, the father's business on earth. See, this son's story doesn't start in a pigsty. It started with a son that thought his life would be better somewhere else with someone else other than the father. And I'll even say this, any illusion that takes you away from life in God and his word, in spirit and in proximity, or replaces God with someone else or something else is an illusion that can lead you to the pigsty if you do not reorient. Anything that you think, the illusion of that is creating distance from the Father and disregard for the relationship of the Father and the aspect of being a child in the Father's house is ultimately on a path towards a pigsty. And And what do I mean by this? Let's talk about kind of a natural progression. I believe where this all starts is this: a son picturing life. Man, I really got to do these chores till my dad dies. I really got to do what my dad says. And what does it first start with? I don't know if I want to do this. And I say this because essentially the thoughts start to form around happiness, comfort, around appeasing the flesh, yes, but the first choice is this: give me what is mine. Now what's fascinating is it's not his. It's his once his father dies. But in his mind, what he wants to do has contorted the reality that he lives in. I'm going to say this again. Sometimes what you want from God contorts your reality of who God is. And in that place, where does it first start? Give me what is mine. If I'm the dad, I'm like, bro, I got a son. I'm like, that ain't yours, my dog. Like, I couldn't imagine going up to my dad right now and being like, hey, I'm one of four. You mind if I get a quarter real quick of all you've owned, literally, right now? My dad be like, yeah, right. Care if you're 35? I got 3 belts. I'll give you all 3. No, anyway. I say that because essentially what happened? This is what I want. I'm going to change reality to dictate how I get it. It's the Father's. No, it's mine. And the Father appeases. But essentially what happens is first money, then distance. If you notice, he receives the money from the Father, and then distance is produced. I want to even say this to you today. If you do not have a rational understanding of how money fuels your life or your view of it, it can very easily be the thing that creates distance between you and God. Why? Because your entire culture worships money. So if your relationship with money is not submitted to God, you will be worshiping it, but man, I love God and he's great, not realizing that you're becoming distant from the Father's heart because your heart has been warmed to another flame. Now I bring this up because where does it start? It starts with give me what is mine. He's given money, he creates distance, and in creating distance, what takes place? The appeasement of the flesh, the desire of the heart, the gluttonous. You can fill in the blank for everything squandering loose living, right? We can fill in the blank. We're mostly adults in here, okay? But then after that, this is what I'm trying to get at with this progression. First, give me what's mine, even though it's not mine. There's this distorted thinking that then gets money, that then creates distance, that then, because of that distance, says, well, because nobody's really watching me, I don't really need to practice morality because distance has really allowed me this kind of ability to not be seen or known. I can kind of do what I want. Then he starts feeding these fleshly desires. Then what happens? That drains him dry of his personhood to where now he doesn't even know how he can survive. And what does he do? He sacrifices the last principles that he has, which is his faith aspect. If you notice, faith isn't really brought in until the very end, but we know that the pigstye is contrary to the cleanliness laws of Judaistic society. So for him to take that on, he's now at the lowest rung. I've sacrificed family and affluence. Now I sacrifice temple standing. Now I sacrifice my spiritual conviction. This man has lost everything, but even in losing everything, what is it all about? The story is he comes to his senses. What's fascinating, I'll spend some time on this later, is did he actually come to his senses or even part of them? Because as he comes to his senses, what is the thought that goes through his mind? I would be better as a slave. Now, I wouldn't say that's full senses because ultimately, what does the Father say? You're not a slave, you're a son. Bring the robe, bring the sandal, bring the ring. Kill the fatted calf. But in his mind, as he comes to his senses, let me be a slave and try to earn my way back. Let me be a slave and just have my needs met and I'll just do whatever it takes to just be close enough to maybe get some of the blessing of a significance. But what does the dad do? Reestablish who the son is. Now I bring all of this up because the illusion of elsewhere oftentimes tries to tell us if you get this, if you go here, if you find that person, if you develop this amount of money, all of these. And what is it really about? Maybe subtly getting us to sacrifice being in the Father's house and following the Father's way in pursuit of your way, in pursuit of your own home. So with that today, I want to talk about 3 things that will get you in the pigsty quickly if you're not careful. 3 things that will get you in the pigsty quickly if you're not careful. Number 1 is this: impatience. You must fight this with everything you have. Father, give me Luke 15:12 says, when our conversations with God become requests and demands for our freedom and fulfillment to be satisfied in our exact timing and exact specification, be very, very careful. Impatience is the subtle belief that God is too slow to be trusted. And impatience will get you trading your inheritance for your impulses because you've been blinded by your own passions. Most don't leave God because he's bad. They leave him when he's not fast enough. If you're single, you're okay. Because no one will complete you but Jesus. Everything else is just a compliment. And if you don't understand completion versus complementation, those two things are very different. Searching for someone to complete your soul instead of complement your humanity is two different things. And I'll even say this, the blessing of singleness is learning completion before you reach for somebody and find out that they'll never complete you. If you're broke, you're okay. Can I get an amen for anybody? And I knew I had him up in here. Yeah. I would even say this. I would even say this. I would rather have no money and have peace than have all the money in the world and not have peace. I'd rather have no money and know the nearness of my Father, the proximity of God, and the trust that he holds my future, than to think that I am the originator, the author, and the finisher of my own life. And if you've not discovered that yet, there will come a time in which you will have to discover it on your own. In which, if you think money is your completion, if you think money is your identity, if you think money is your success metric, there will come a time where God will reveal, if you've claimed lordship, but have allowed another Lord to reign supreme, there will come a cleansing of your temple. If you're restless in the day-to-day, restless within your career, restless within your calling, can't I get to where I want to be? I want to say this. You're going to be okay. And the reason is your rest is in Jesus, not in what you produce, rather than what his life produces in you. I would even say this. Oftentimes today, I feel like we want God's plans and we want God's promises. And it really comes down to three things: the head, the heart, and the habit. Meaning, you can have all the head knowledge you want. If you've been raised in faith, you know where the head knowledge is. Heart goes a little bit deeper because there's depth, there's intimacy, but I can give you 3 books that can get you to fake depth really quick if you want. You can't fake habit. And what I mean by that is God knows people can readily assess head and heart, and they can't necessarily see habit, but you know your God sees habit. And the revelation that your habits are what you worship. Your habits are what you behold. Your habits are what you're going to become. And if I don't have any habits in God, then I want his plan and purpose to take place. That's literally saying, give me my inheritance, but I don't want any responsibility. Give me my inheritance, but I don't want to own the business. I don't even want to take care of the house. I just want to do my own thing. See, I would say this, if you're somebody in here and you're looking and saying, I'm restless in the day-to-day, learn to find your rest in God before you get to the place where you thought would provide your rest that actually has provided emptiness. Because that's a tough place to be, is when you get everything you wanted to only find out that it's actually not what you wanted and you're in a pigsty, but you thought you would be in a palace. And what happens? You realize, oh, it's always been about the Father and the Father's house. You can be in a hurry and not realize you're in a hurry into destruction. For proximity to the Father will open up promises if you allow the process of development to play out properly. I want to say this again. Proximity to the Father will open up promises if you allow development to play out properly. Some of us might even be frustrated right now. We're like, God, what are you doing? Where's it been? And God's like, you've been delaying character development for 15 years, my dog. Like, God, why aren't you doing anything? He's like, you haven't really done anything with me in like a grip, my man. Like, dude, I go to church. Like, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people who go to church. Right? What am I trying to say? Your character development unlocks more doors than you realize it does. And some people, I'm not talking about self-help character development. I'm talking like biblical character development. like the normal stuff, like the habit stuff, the head, heart, habit aligned stuff that actually refines the motives of man stuff. That's what development does. What you think you want over time shifts and takes on many iterations and variations. Why? Because the closer you get to God, as our ethos has been from the beginning, the Creator longs to create. If you get close to the Creator, you might find what you thought was going to be created from your life is very different than actually what He longs to create with your life. But if you submit to development, I promise you there will be a plan and a promised land you walk in, a rest you experience. But that's up to you. The first one, all right? That first one was impatience. The second one is escape. The second one, escape, because no matter where you run, you cannot outrun yourself. The prodigal son didn't leave in crisis. He left the boredom of ordinary life. The father's house was safe and functional, but it didn't feel like it was enough. The same restlessness you feel will show up in the next job, the next relationship, the next city or place you go, because you cannot fix inside problems with outside solutions. The son didn't escape. His idea of escape had led him to the emptiness of life without the father. And when he came to his senses, verse 17, he returned to what had always made the most sense: the father's house and the father's order. Everything you're chasing outside can be found inside a life with God, but it takes commitment and work to see those things come to pass. Everything you're trying to escape is ultimately what God tries to form you with. Because it is in the leaning into the difficult situations, it is the leaning into the furnace of refinement that truly shows who God is. I wrote about this in a newsletter, our newsletter last month, but one of the more profound, I would say, revelations really actually came from my wife last year. If you research the Old Testament, there's a lot of talk about refinement, fire, and refinement, specifically silver. Silver refined in the fire 7 times over in this purification process. And what's interesting actually is that in modern technology today, you could research how silver is refined, but actually placing yourself contextually in that day, silver process refinement is a profound metaphor for how God sees character development. So essentially, what would take place is silver would be taken out, placed into a fire, and pulled out. And then as it's in the fire, dross would be scraped off of it, or the impurities, the things that weren't allowing it to bond in strength and be sharpened. So what would happen is the silver would be pulled out, and as it's pulled out, it would cool, and then literally, I'm not kidding, you could do this research, it was insane revelation. The silversmith would take the silver, hold it up to his face, and if he couldn't see his reflection clearly, would put it back into the furnace. And literally, the process of silver refinement is pulling it out of the furnace. Can I see myself in it? If I can't, back into the furnace it goes. And then pull it out. Have I scraped off the impurity? Looking at it, do I see myself cloudy or distorted? If I do, back into the furnace. See, what am I trying to get at? We want a journey with God where we go through one furnace experience and coming out looking like Jesus. And I'm going to say this, the process of life is the realization that we will always be having impurities stripped away. But the silversmith is not just stripping them away to strip them away, but he's stripping them away so that he can see his reflection and the world can see his reflection in how you live and what he's produced in your life. See, the son didn't just leave the father's house. He left the father's order. And that is a recipe that gets you in the pigsty quickly. I'll even say this. You can be in the father's house and not submitted to the father's order. You can be in the father's house and not submitted to the father's way of doing things, because ultimately that's probably what took place before the man left. He was in the father's house regretting the father's order. He was in the father's house regretting the responsibilities of being a son. In the father's house saying, I don't want to do the things my father does. And then what happens? All right, actually, I'm leaving the father's house and I'm leaving the father's order now. I would even say this, is your prioritization of God equal parts? Father's house is a part of who I am, and Father's order is what forms the life that I live. Because ultimately what happened with the son is he squandered what his father had. But how did he squander it and why did he squander it? Because he hadn't developed what his father had developed to get to where his father was. And I would even say this, your wanting from God, your shortcuts from God, oftentimes maybe you're coming down to wanting what God has for you, but not wanting to develop the heart and the Christ likeness that can actually sustain the promise and blessing from heaven upon your life. Number 3, remember, impatience, escape, and the last one is drift. Because leaving the father was a slow drift into the losing of everything the son had ever known his life to be. Social standing, spiritual place, and the identity of being a son to hoping to survive as a slave. Slow drift drowning is the number one cause of spiritual bankruptcy I see. The small compromises, the cherry picking of God's word to suit my comforts, the consistency and committedness that is more feeling than it is function. The son's blessing was the father. When all was stripped away, the realization was that anywhere that wasn't with the Father wasn't worth being in. The realization of the son, I've had the wealth, I've had the loose living, I've done all the stuff, I've traveled. Now, guess what? Take me back to the Father's house. Why? Because that's the place that I actually need. That is where I flourish the most. And his view of even being in the Father's house is, let me be a slave to survive. And what happens? The father says, now ring, robe, sandals, fatted calf. You still are my son. Now I bring that up because ultimately I think once again to play back into this, the story is a story of drift. The illusion of elsewhere, meaning I want to go to a foreign land, I want to have a bunch of money. That's probably where it all started. I'm tired of doing this day-to-day monotonous thing. Give me a ton of money so I can do my own thing, not have to answer to anyone. And then it drifts from, okay, I have money, now I'm in another land, to now I'm loosely teetering in my walk, in my faith, in my identity, all of the things. And then slowly over time, what does it produce? Pigstye lifestyle. Drift is in all of it. What is drift? Once again, I've quoted a few things. It's this idea that there's just a few things that I'll do, or cherry picking my passion points, or really doing the stuff that's easy but kind of adverse to the hard. What am I trying to get at? Is drift is when we kind of start to make excuses for our weaknesses. We start to make excuses for the deep character development of a few areas that we know are deep character development, but dang, we don't want to deal with them. 2 times in my life, I feel like I've almost drowned. First one was on that trip in India. And as I was on that trip in India, I'll never forget it because we were swimming in the Bay of Bengal in the Indian Ocean. And the people who were there that day said, hey, the current's really strong. It's way more than any ocean or lake you've swam in. Be careful. And I was like, well, I've swam in tons of lakes and tons of oceans. I'm not staying at my waist belly button. I'm definitely going over my head. There are waves. So we start swimming, me and a couple friends. And as we're swimming, I'll never forget it. It's one of those where, like, when you come out of a wave and you try to touch the ground and you can't, and you're like, ooh, it's not a good feeling, because you're like, where's the ground? Where's the ground, right? You're like, want something stable to stand on, but at the same time, having a lot of fun. And that's what it was. I would like to, we're swimming. Finally, I realized we've drifted a little bit, and I look at my friends and say, hey, let's swim to the shore a little bit. We're all having fun in the waves. And I remember we start swimming, and I realized I'm not going anywhere. In fact, I'm actually losing some distance. And I felt like I'm a decent in shape, felt like I was a pretty good swimmer. So we're talking and we're like, hey, keep trying to touch the ground. Nope, there's nothing there. Okay, swim a little bit, try to touch the ground. Still not there. Okay, sick. Keep swimming. I'm not kidding. After about 5 minutes of testing, I realized we had reached the point where the ground, I had to absolutely put my head down and swim with everything inside of me to get back. I was so exhausted by the time I got to the beach. We just laid on the shore, me and my 3 friends, not even fully out of the water, just laid on the shore, breathing. I did not swim the rest of the 2 days. I was that traumatized from that incident. Now, I want you to enter into some imagery for a second. I'm swimming with my friends, just having fun. I know that there could be danger. And how am I gauging it? Do I have something stable to stand on? Now, as I've lost that, I think in my own strength, I can find it at any time. But slowly I don't realize that I'm losing it. I'm losing it. And then finally, I need it bad right now. I need it bad. My lungs, I'm getting tired, and I'm trying to stand, and there's nothing to stand on, and I swim a little. There's nothing to stand on. I swim a little. And what's happened? I've drifted to the point that what I thought was stability and strength, I'd actually completely disregarded. And as I slowly drifted away from it, I thought I could just get it back instantaneously. But all of those little mistakes, those little compromises, those little things had led me into a place of deep inadequacy and awareness of I don't have the strength to swim anymore to get back to there. And then the choice, will I give it everything I got to get back? And I'll even say this, some of us, we've maybe lost the stability to stand on our legs with the Lord because we've just been tired and we've just drifted into whatever it is. We've drifted into religious ideology that's maybe apart from him, or we've went our own rabbit trails of faith, or we've went through our own pain or brokenness or these types of things. And what's really happening is the stability is now gone. And we're looking and saying, what am I supposed to do now? And the invitation, swim with everything you got back. There is stability at some point, but you are going to have to swim with everything you have. You're tired, you're still going to have to swim. You're running out of air, you're still going to have to swim. There is stability and there is strength for you, but there's also a learning lesson. And that learning lesson is you can drift easy and then have to fight back way harder than you realized. But there is strength and stability for you. The final story I have is I remember swimming. We lived in Michigan. And there was a river in our backyard and an island in the middle. And when we would jump in, there was kind of this deep hole that you had to swim through. And once you swam through it, there was an island on the other side you could stand in. Now, there was really strong current, meaning that you kind of needed to swim quickly to get through it, or else the hole would kind of extend all the way around. And you would never miss the island, but you would maybe have to swim a lot longer, maybe even a lot harder. But there was one thing you could not do. Because essentially, if you just swam towards the island, you would make it eventually. But there was one thing you couldn't do. When you were swimming, you couldn't miss your direction. Meaning that if you went underwater swimming or put your head down swimming, you couldn't go from the island to fighting the current. Because all of a sudden, as you're swimming, you don't realize that you're not actually swimming towards the safety. You're swimming against the current, and the current you won't win. It'll slowly drain you, slowly get you tired, slowly get you to the point where you can't swim anymore. So I remember I'm swimming, and as I'm swimming across, I don't realize that my body has turned not towards where I'm trying to swim towards, but against the current. And I'm getting tired, and I remember peeking my head up and yelling for my parents who were on the dock. And literally I yell for my parents, and I go under, and I'm just swimming underwater, trying with everything I can to get to this island. And I get to this island, and as I get to the island, I stand up. And the feeling I had was I made it, but also it was this realization. And I pray that you would leave with this. Because ultimately the picture of that was not me getting to the place I wanted. It was me standing up, thinking I was maybe going to drown, and realizing that my parents were within 5-10 feet from me. They had jumped in, and they were real close. That even if I didn't make it there, they were coming to get me. And I say that because wherever your drift is, maybe you've drifted with a few friends and a few people, and you feel like you don't have the strength to get back. Or you fought against a current that has stolen everything from you. It is about reorienting back to where are we swimming towards? Who are we swimming after? What is the direction that we're going in? Who are we listening to? Because it is all of these things that reminds us that there is a God who welcomes us back with open arms. There's a God who jumps in after us in the midst of all of our own drift. And no matter how much you think the illusion of elsewhere will meet the needs of your soul, there is a Father who says, I'll wait for the day that you realize that I am the one who meets your soul. I'll wait for the day that you realize that as you've been infatuated with building your own house and kingdom, that if you would build my house and kingdom, I would take care of the rest. That if you would submit to my house and my order, that I have more than you could ever imagine, but it's going to have to come from you opening your hands and not running from mine. So today I invite you to realize that if you're restless, there is rest. And it's not your promised land, it's his personhood. Would you stand to your feet today? In closing, I invite you to bow your heads and to close your eyes today. Here at our church, we believe in being still and knowing that He is God. And so I invite you to be still today, to let this word a little bit process in your mind and in your heart. Ask God if He has something for you today, or maybe just invite the Lord to come meet you where you are. But in stillness and in silence, let's be still and know that there is a God with us, around us, and longing to engage with us today. We'll take a few minutes to be still. Then we'll recite the Lord's Prayer and worship with one final song.